April 18, 1945. Dawn crawls across the ruins of central Germany, pale and cold, its light falling on towns reduced to ash and silence. The war is ending, though no one dares to say it aloud. Smoke drifts from what used to be factories, villages, and forests turned to mud. In the distance, an entire army waits, not to fight but to surrender. 500,000 men, weary, hollow-eyed, stripped of illusion. The German war machine that once seemed unstoppable now stands still, its engines quiet, its will broken by the sheer weight of inevitability. They call it the Western Front, but by now there is no front, only retreat. The Americans advance with the calm precision of men who know the outcome has already been written. Columns of tanks move like slow iron animals through roads lined with wreckage. Above them, the sky hums with the sound of aircraft, endless and unchallenged. The Germans who still wear their uniforms do so out of habit, not pride. Every man knows what lies behind them: Soviet vengeance, a storm of retribution from the east. Ahead lies the unknown face of America, and with it, a fragile chance to survive. For months, rumors have traveled faster than the soldiers themselves. The Americans, they say, treat prisoners fairly. They feed them. They don't execute them in ditches or burn villages in revenge. Compared to the brutality of the Eastern Front, the Western advance feels almost humane. It is enough to shift the direction of fear. Entire battalions quietly abandon their posts, marching west not to defend but to surrender. To the Americans, they bring their last act of obedience, laying down their arms with discipline, as if still following orders from a country that no longer exists. In the towns along the Rhine, civilians watch the processions with hollow faces. Once they cheered parades of victory, now they witness the slow march of defeat. The soldiers' boots scuff through dust and rubble, their eyes lowered, their uniforms faded to the same gray as the ruins. Some carry small white flags, others simply raise their hands when they see the glint of American helmets. They are no longer enemies. They are men who have outlived the war that defined them. Behind every step lies the question none of them can answer: how did it all come to this? On the American side, the response is steady, almost ritualistic. Orders are clear: accept surrender, disarm, process, move on. The soldiers of the U.S. Army are tired too, tired of mud, of burned-out towns, of ghosts that speak German. Yet even they feel the strange weight of what they're witnessing. Never before in modern history had so many men laid down their weapons in unison. Some American officers describe it later as surreal, others as quietly tragic. No one celebrates. There is only the grim efficiency of paperwork, identification, and the endless movement of prisoners toward camps that can barely hold them. The German soldiers are surprised by what they find. The Americans feed them, give them cigarettes, sometimes even share a joke. There is no shouting, no humiliation. For many, it is the first act of kindness they've seen in years. They line up for bread as if it were a sacrament. Some weep, not out of gratitude but out of shame. They had been told the Americans were barbarians. Instead, they find men who look tired just like them. The war's propaganda collapses faster than the front lines ever did. The truth is disarming in its simplicity. Both sides are human and both are broken. In the East, it is a different story. Those who fall into Soviet hands rarely return. Word spreads fast. Entire divisions vanish into the mist of retribution. German officers whisper of camps beyond the horizon, of labor that ends only in silence. The choice becomes clear. West means life, East means disappearance. And so, the flow of men continues, a tide of surrender moving relentlessly toward the Americans. Trucks break down under the weight of prisoners. Fields become temporary enclosures. Town squares fill with the gray tide of defeat. By the end of April, the numbers are staggering. Whole armies dissolve without a final battle. Generals who once commanded thousands now approach American lines under white flags. They hand over their pistols with quiet dignity, understanding that history has already judged them. The Americans accept their surrender with neither cruelty nor triumph. They know that in this moment, mercy speaks louder than vengeance. Even the sound of gunfire fades, only the shuffle of boots remains, and the low murmur of languages mixing in exhaustion. The scenes are hauntingly calm. German soldiers sit beside American guards, sharing coffee brewed from army rations. A few try to explain themselves. We had no choice, they say, we fought for survival. The Americans rarely answer. They've seen the camps, the villages, the evidence of horror scattered across Europe. They listen, but the silence between them is heavier than any word. And yet, in that silence, something fragile begins. A faint recognition that the war's ending might also be a beginning, if only humanity can learn from what it has done. As the final days of the Reich collapse into chaos, these mass surrenders become the quiet punctuation of a long, violent sentence. The once proud German army, drilled in discipline and defiance, now moves like a single exhausted organism toward captivity. 500,000 men choose the unknown mercy of the Americans over the certain fury of the Soviets. It is not courage that drives them, nor loyalty, only the instinct to survive what they themselves helped unleash. The devil they feared most was not on the battlefield but within their own history. When victory is finally declared, there are no cheers among the surrendered. The war has already taken everything worth celebrating. The Americans guard them without hatred, the Germans wait without hope. Between them lies a silence as vast as the continent they've destroyed. In the months to come, these prisoners will rebuild roads, towns, and fields. Some will stay in the West, others will return home to the ruins of their country. But all of them will remember the day they walked toward the enemy, not to fight but to surrender, and how, in that strange mercy, they found the faintest trace of redemption. The records call it the largest mass surrender in modern warfare. The historians count numbers, the generals record logistics, but the truth of it lives in quieter moments. A soldier lowering his rifle, an American sharing a canteen, a world finally too tired to hate. On April 18, 1945, the thunder of war began to fade, not with an explosion, but with a gesture of hands raised to the sky. The surrender fields stretch for miles. Barbed wire glints in the thin April sunlight, circling meadows that once grew wheat and now hold tens of thousands of men. They sit in rows, knees drawn up, waiting for instructions that never seem to end. Trucks roll by carrying bread, water, crates of rations. The American guards move carefully among them, outnumbered 50-1. Their orders are simple: keep everyone alive until proper camps can be built. It is a task no army in history has practiced, feeding an entire nation inside its own borders. At first, the prisoners cannot believe the quiet. After years of air raid sirens and artillery, silence feels unnatural. They listen for planes, for bombs, for the sound of engines that once meant survival. Instead, there is only the wind and the murmur of 100 languages: German, Czech, Polish, bits of English learned from the guards. Some men trade buttons or cigarettes, others carve bits of wood into chess pieces. A few write in small notebooks, trying to record what it means to watch a war evaporate around them. Across the Rhine, towns are filling with displaced people. Civilians drift between ruins, searching for food or lost relatives. American supply trucks pass through streets where children wave cautiously from doorways. The war's machinery is still visible: burned tanks, collapsed bridges, but its noise is gone. For the first time in years, people can hear their own footsteps. The soldiers guarding the prisoners feel the same strange peace. They talk quietly about home, about what they will do when they return. Many of them are no older than the men behind the wire. Weeks pass. The weather warms. Barbed wire enclosures become organized camps with tents and kitchens. Prisoners are assigned work details: repairing roads, clearing rubble, burying the remnants of the war. Some volunteer to help the Americans distribute supplies. Others stare at the horizon, still expecting the thunder of the Eastern Front to roll toward them. Letters begin to arrive through the Red Cross. A few men receive word that their families survived. Others learn that their cities no longer exist. Each message is read aloud to a circle of listeners, followed by a silence that lasts longer than the letter itself. Among the guards, attitudes change slowly. At first they see only the uniform, later they begin to see faces. One sergeant from Ohio keeps a small notebook where he writes the names of prisoners who helped him build a bridge near the Rhine. They work like we do, he notes. Maybe that's the point. The war that once divided them now feels distant, replaced by exhaustion and an odd kind of respect. The men on both sides have learned that survival is the last form of victory. By summer, the number of prisoners exceeds 500,000. New camps rise in open fields, each marked by long rows of tents and watchtowers. The Americans struggle to feed them all. The logistics of peace prove almost as complex as those of war. Yet despite shortages, order holds. Disease is contained, rations stretch further than expected, and discipline returns in a quiet, cooperative way. The German officers still salute when addressed. The Americans return the gesture out of practicality, not ceremony. The formality gives structure to a world that has forgotten its shape. Every night, the camps hum with low voices. Men tell stories, not of battles but of home, of music, of the smell of rain before the war began. Some confess they never truly believed in the empire they served. Others cling to pride as a shield against shame. The Americans listen when they can. The conversations are cautious, like people speaking across a thin sheet of glass. They do not talk about guilt or ideology. They talk about hunger, fatigue, and the shared desire never to hear another gun again. Autumn brings a slow change. The prisoners begin to look healthier. Work teams rebuild bridges and rail lines. The same hands that once held rifles now lay stones for roads. American officers note the efficiency, the precision, the discipline that had once powered a war machine now turned toward reconstruction. Slowly, the camps empty as men are released or transferred. Some volunteer to help with relief efforts across Germany. Others simply vanish into the crowd of civilians trying to start over. For many, the surrender becomes the dividing line of their lives. Before it, they belong to something vast and terrible. After it, they belong only to memory. In later years, they will tell their children not about battles, but about the morning they laid down their arms and realized they were still alive. Historians will count the numbers, trace the orders, describe the movements of armies, but none of that captures the sound of that moment. 500,000 rifles hitting the ground in near silence. By winter's end, the camps are nearly empty. The Americans pack up their posts, their trucks, their paperwork, and prepare to go home. The war in Europe has been over for months, but the feeling of it lingers in the air. The Germans left behind begin to rebuild their towns with the materials the occupiers provide. New roads rise over the old ones and the land starts to forget. Yet every spring, when the wind crosses the Rhine, some of the former soldiers swear they can still hear it. The faint rustle of boots marching west, the echo of a decision made not out of loyalty, but out of the pure, stubborn will to live. The surrender of those 500,000 men did more than end a campaign. It revealed the truth about the war's final days. Power had shifted from ideology to humanity, from command to compassion. In choosing to surrender rather than to die, they preserved something fragile that the war had nearly destroyed: the idea that mercy can exist even at the edge of destruction. Decades later, the archives still record the date, the numbers, the coordinates. But in the quiet spaces between those lines lies the real story: how a generation discovered that survival itself can be an act of courage. Winter fades slowly from the German countryside. The camps that once held thousands are now quiet fields again, marked only by faint lines in the grass where fences once stood. Trains carry prisoners home in steady waves. The men stare from the windows at a landscape that feels both familiar and foreign. Towns half rebuilt, rivers clearing of wreckage, children waving from bridges. Every mile traveled eastward feels like a passage between two worlds, the one they destroyed and the one they must now rebuild. In 1946, the roads are filled with movement. Former soldiers walk beside civilians, everyone searching for someone they lost. The Americans who once guarded them now serve as administrators, teachers, and engineers. They repair rail lines, distribute food, oversee elections. Some remain in small towns long enough to learn a few German words, to share coffee with families who only months before had called them enemies. The distance between occupier and occupied begins to shrink, not through speeches, but through the quiet work of survival. Among the returning prisoners there is an uneasy silence. They do not speak of the front or of surrender, except in fragments. At first there is shame, for defeat, for obedience, for what their country became. Yet within that silence grows something different, a determination never to repeat the same mistakes. They take jobs clearing rubble, join volunteer brigades, plant crops where bomb craters once lay. The act of rebuilding becomes its own kind of repentance. Every brick lifted, every seed sown, is a promise to live differently. The Americans, too, carry memories that will not fade. Many of them write home about the prisoners they met: the man who traded his watch for a chocolate bar, the officer who thanked them for mercy, the teenager who had never seen an airplane before the war. Years later, when they tell their children about Europe, it is not the battles they describe, but the strange stillness of that April morning when thousands surrendered without a shot. They remember the weight of quiet more than the sound of guns. By 1947, most of the prisoners have returned to their families. Some find only ruins waiting for them. Others find strangers living in their homes. Yet even in loss there is a sense of renewal. Churches reopen, schools begin again, and newspapers print stories about a new kind of Germany, one that must be built on humility rather than power. The men who surrendered learned to speak of it not as a disgrace, but as a moment of clarity. "We survived because we stopped," one writes in his diary. "That was our first act of peace." In Washington and London, the numbers are filed away: 500,000 captives processed, fed, released. To historians it becomes a logistical miracle. To the men who lived it, it remains something more intimate. A shared moment when two armies discovered that mercy could be stronger than hatred. The American officers who managed the surrenders return home with mixed feelings. They are proud of their discipline, yet haunted by what they saw. War, they realized, does not end with silence. It lingers in gestures, in the way people look at each other across a table. As years pass, monuments rise on both sides of the Atlantic. They do not celebrate victory so much as endurance. In small German towns, plaques mark the sites of former camps with simple words. Here, men laid down their arms and found humanity again. Veterans visit quietly, leaving flowers, sometimes just standing in silence. The sound of the wind through the grass replaces the roar of engines. The land itself seems to exhale. By the 1960s, a new generation walks the rebuilt streets of Frankfurt, Cologne, and Nuremberg without knowing the full weight of that spring in 1945. Their parents rarely speak of it, but it is there, in the way they value peace, in their distrust of flags and slogans. Across the ocean, American veterans grow old remembering the same days, wondering how so much death could end in such quiet. When they meet at reunions, they talk not of victories but of the faces of the men who surrendered, and how relief looked the same in every language. Time softens the details but not the lesson. 500,000 soldiers discovered that surrender was not the end of dignity but the beginning of redemption. The Americans who accepted it learned that power could be measured not only in strength but in restraint. Together they left behind a small fragment of hope in a century filled with despair, proof that even in the ruins of war humanity can still choose compassion. Today, if you stand on those same fields where the wire once glittered in the sun, you can hear only the wind and the birds. The earth has reclaimed the trenches, and the rivers have cleared themselves of rust. Yet somewhere beneath the soil lies the memory of that April day, the moment when the weapons fell silent and men chose life over death. History records it as a surrender, but those who were there remember it differently, as the first breath of peace after the longest night of war.